So we are live and ready to roll.
Get flu at the same time. It's 6.
It's 6, yep.
Well, I think you should.
Computer say 5:58.
It's the machines are,
I'm
the
correct.
the
From the
computers
future?
are about 2 minutes slow, yeah. So.
This computer says 6:01. Now we're late.
That's correct.
And the mayor is right on time.
There you go.
That you were early.
I was until I was late. I was early. Now I'm late. I'll now call to order the Riverside City Council special meeting and work session for Thursday, September 14th, 2023. If you would all join me to rise to pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Denny.
Here.
Mrs. Franklin. Ms. Fry.
Here.
Mr. Joseph.
Yes.
Ms. Lomax.
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield.
Present.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Move to excuse. Second.
We have a motion for Mr. Joseph and a second for Mr. Maxfield to excuse Ms. Franklin from tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Thank you. Mr. Manager, any additions or corrections to the agenda as presented?
Only one, Mr. Mayor. We'll remove item 11.3, which deals with the Ohio EPA technical grant assistance discussion item for the work session. The only reason being that after some late breaking due diligence, the timing really is not ripe to pursue that. So no real need to discuss this evening.
Move to accept the adjusted.
Second.
We have a motion from the deputy mayor and a second from Mr. Maxfield to accept the amended agenda.
Thank
All
you.
those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries.
Move to go in executive session.
Second.
We have a motion from the deputy mayor and a second from Mr. Maxfield to go into executive session for the reason listed on the agenda. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Lomax.
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield.
Yes.
Mr. Denny.
Yes.
Ms. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Joseph.
Yes.
Mayor Williams.
Yes. We are in executive session at 6:03 PM.
And
Everybody smile.
we're back.
And we are out of executive session at 6:23 PM. As we reconvene, we will move down the agenda and I will turn it over to the city manager. Oh, wait, we have public comment on
Public
agenda
comment.
items
Yeah,
today?
we do because we
Special
have
meeting.
two things you're voting on.
Of course, we always welcome public comment from the public. If there's anyone in the council chambers here that would wish to comment on agenda items, you can always pick up a slip in the back and turn it into the clerk. Keep that in mind. We'll move on to the resolutions. We have two resolutions here that we'll consider. The first one, resolution 23-R-2868. Mr. Manager, if you could just give the folks who might be watching or listening an idea of what we're about to vote on.
Sure. This resolution confirms the appointment of Mr. Mark Miller to the position of Fire Chief for the city of Riverside. I'm very excited about the opportunity, I think that, and all the skills that Mark will bring to our organization and what that means for us going forward. And so I enthusiastically recommend that you approve this resolution.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Denning and a second from Mr. Maxfield to accept resolution or to approve resolution 23-R-2868 and welcome Mr. Miller aboard. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much. And the second resolution, Mr. Manager.
Second resolution is a bit of housekeeping. As discussed with council earlier, it's basically a cleanup of the existing property maintenance contract with Colliers for property management services for this property. That will see us through to the end of the year and give us a little bit of time to rescope and rebid that service for next year.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Denning and a second from Mr. Maxfield. All those in favor of resolution 23-R-2869 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much. And now we will move into our work session items and I will turn it back over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First item up is just a topic concerning various board and commission appointments. So just a few things to bring to your attention. We will be bringing housing council appointments, recommended housing council appointments to council at the next meeting next week. One of the recommendations on staff is that it's a common practice, I would say, and I know Huber Heights is a good example, where they will appoint staff to sit on the housing council. As you know, Mr. Owens, who's on planning commission, was the planning commission's appointee. The way our council is constructed is the mayor gets 2 appointments, council gets 2 appointments. And then once that body convenes for the first time, the housing council itself selects 2 additional residents at large. So as we corresponded earlier in the week, the staff recommendation is to name the community development director, the economic development specialist, and I believe the finance director as staff appointments to the housing council. In staff's opinion, it would be helpful to have someone from council, though, also sit on that, since the housing council is making recommendations to the broader council about CRA incentives. It would help to have some council representation there. The feedback we wanted to get from you today is just whether or not any of you are interested in serving in particular on that. If so, we will include that person in next week's recommended appointees for the housing council position.
I would make a motion. Is that appropriate?
Well, technically we can't vote. We're just looking for consensus. So
Consensus, I would recommend that we ask the mayor to serve on that committee because of his background and his expertise in the field.
I would agree with
That
that.
it would be
Maybe the first part.
a good place to share that technology.
Has a lot to do with maps.
many, yes, many
There's a
maps.
map in one of the emails you sent. Like
This
that's
is true. Yeah.
where I belong.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
And I think he agreed. I didn't just out of the blue pluck that. So
Yeah, and as when I met with the deputy mayor and the city manager this morning for our agenda review for next week's meeting, when we were talking about the idea of maybe a council member serving, the legislative process that a housing council would go through, I have sat on before in a previous role that I had when I worked on the staff side in local government in Greene County for enterprise zones and similar government state-run programs. So I have, I think, at least a cursory idea of what it is that a elected body would be trying to accomplish by using these tools. So I'm happy to be the representative of council on that body and Josh, reel me in, as you would say, but this group would make a recommendation to council. The council would make a final decision on for any decision that should need to come from this.
Correct. And so it functions similarly to planning commission, for example, where if an applicant or developer comes in and requests CRA incentives, that the housing council as a body would hear that, and the housing council would then vote as a body on whether to recommend, approve, or deny those incentives to the broader city council. So very similar recommendation.
So
Yeah.
either way, it still comes to us.
Yeah.
Correct.
So
It'd still be
even if-
decided
even
by
if the-
us.
Even if the housing council says, we don't think this is a good idea, it would still come to council to make a decision up or down.
Correct. It's a recommendation.
Right.
To council. Yeah. And I think the thought process is just that having someone on council to participate in that provides an ability for them to report out to the broader council about what those conversations were like and to just represent that viewpoint. So. So if there's no further discussion on that, then what we will do is prepare that recommended list of appointees for next week's meeting.
I have one more thing.
Oh, sure. I'm
And
sorry.
another role of the housing council is the council would review any approved application CRA agreements and make sure that the agreements are being adhered to.
Mhm.
So I would recommend that once it's established that there be an annual meeting to review those applications. So that'll be another part of that role.
Yeah, so even if there's no new applications, they would still
Yes.
meet annually to review
Yes. Mhm.
existing CRAs to make sure that compliance is being met.
Yes.
Correct. And thank you. Yep, absolutely.
So how many people do we have left? We still have to pick our two, right?
Well, the four, in total, there are four nominees, two from there and two from council, and the staff would recommend, we'll give you kind of the four recommended nominees. So it would be the community development director, economic development specialist, finance director, and in all likelihood, the mayor, and that will come before you next week for discussion and a vote. And then assuming that council adopts those recommended nominees, then those folks with Mr. Owens would meet for the first time as the housing council and select two more residents at large to flesh out the entire body.
Council members.
No, they're residents. We started to reach out to those and gauge
Okay.
their interest.
No, I thought we had to pick two. I
No.
thought we were
No,
picking two.
Well,
part of our
we-
picks will be
Yeah.
the two directors.
Okay.
Yeah, Josh is recommending this is what council does with their picks, what
That
the
makes
mayor does
sense.
with his two
Right.
picks.
I mean,
And among those four options, one person from council in addition to staff members.
I mean,
And then that group with the planning commission member would find would ask two citizens.
Yes.
that makes sense.
And that is a good segue into, we would be remiss if we did not make an open call. While certainly, staff and council speak with citizens on a regular basis, and there are folks that we're acquainted with who we think may be a good fit for this kind of a body. If anybody out watching is interested in participating, we would welcome that. So welcome that interest. So I would recommend, feel free to email either the city manager box or actually Ms. Holt, nholt@riversideoh.gov is the best way to convey your interest. And then we can send that to the housing council once it's formed. So that's all I had on housing council. We also, at next week's meeting, will have renewal appointees for the Board of Zoning Appeals and for the Parks Commission as well. We did get one new applicant for Board of Zoning Appeals. Ms. Holt has met with that applicant. And I believe, I don't want to speak for you, if you want to maybe talk a little bit about, but I think we're in general comfortable with the applicant and what they're bringing to the table, and that will help round out representation because that committee has been down a member for quite some time now as well. So, and again, it's anybody out there who's interested in any board, commission, or other volunteer opportunity, we will happily talk to you. So those will come before you as well. And what we would look for is a letter of appointment, Madam Clerk, if
They'll
I'm not
make
mistaken.
motions And then I'll send a letter, yes.
Yeah, we make the motion and then do the letter. So, okay. Any questions on board commission appointments before we move on? Okay. I'm actually going to turn it over to Ms. Holtz to dive into the next two topic items. And I believe we're doing Glendine first. Okay. Let me share the screen.
Yes.
So I'll just back up with this one. This is something that's been ongoing for quite a while. I know this will be new for a few of our council members. This started with a rezoning back in 2021 under a completely different developer. It was a 14-acre project when it first became idea. And since then, things have changed as the developer changed. The back half has been subdivided as they realize with several phase 1, phase 2 studies that the back half of the parcel cannot support development and the soils are actually unstable. So it has been subdivided and sold to a new developer. And as they're thinking about what that project looks like, they realized that they had to really reconfigure the layout, and they are looking to the city to kind of see if we are interested in using our parcel. If you can go to the next slide.
Yep.
The city actually has several parcels, but this one in particular is what they're interested in using that to access Durant Drive for utilities and expanding a stormwater basin to kind of relieve some of the drainage and stormwater issues over there. So I'm asking today if you are interested in me continuing those conversations with the developer, or how we should move forward to relieve some of their development issues, I guess.
Would that come in the form of an easement, or would that come in the form of us selling them the whole property?
And that's what if you want us to continue those conversations, we probably have to go into executive session to have those.
Oh,
Yep.
We basically need to flesh that out with the developer a little bit. I think
Okay.
what we're fishing for is that if there's any real hesitation from council's part on potentially parting with this parcel or otherwise granting an easement or something, then we could kind of pump the brakes on the broader conversation. If you're open to the conversation, though, we can continue talking and then take it a step further. So,
All we do right now is kind of mow and maintain that. Is what,
yep, correct. And most of it, if I'm not mistaken, is in the floodplain.
That's right.
The whole thing is.
Yeah.
no.
Our
Not all
property,
of it.
Not-
Up of
by
our
the road,
property.
up by
yeah, our
Glen
property
Beach.
is mostly in the floodplain.
well, I just think from a big picture view, granting an easement is a lot different than selling a whole parcel. So those are, while both allow someone to use something, they're quite far apart, but I'm interested to hear what else is planned or what else has been discussed. So
And, if council does have interest in moving forward, that could also be something that should the developer submit a CRA application, that would give the housing council something to negotiate with.
yeah.
Yeah, it's it is a property that I think has, just because of the flood and drainage, has some challenges as far as just general development goes. It's also not a huge parcel, relative to other parcels, but
It was originally I think it was the village owned it. It was partially landfill. It was covered with honeysuckle and vegetation. Boy Scout, Eagle Scout project was to clean it up. They did a lot. And then the JCs did a lot to get a lot of the honeysuckle cleaned up so that it's mowable. Originally Parks and Rec had put in for some grants to make it into like a picnic grove. And that fell out of whatever. So if we can't make it into a park-like setting and it's costing us huge amounts of maintenance, it doesn't seem like it's a good thing for us to keep. Now, if we need green space and we want to make it into a park, that's a different story, but being the one that put a lot of sweat equity into that property myself personally,
sure.
I would prefer it to be a picnic grove, but if we have the opportunity to cut our maintenance costs and make it into something more positive, I say go for it.
So for like trade secret and real estate discussion, so it's not public, can we do, like, when do we need to have a discussion on this, like in private?
I think the next step is that, it sounds like in general, there's some receptiveness to just, let's figure out what the real ask is here. And then once we have an idea about what that is, which I imagine Ms. Holt will work, diligently on here in the next couple of weeks, then what we will do is schedule a time for probably one of the meetings in October to have an executive session about real estate
Yeah.
and then go from there.
Is it possible? Because I feel bad that I didn't know that we own that property. So is there a chance, maybe I'm asking a little bit ahead for like capital assets, land being one of them. Is there a way for us to get like disposed on all the like infrastructure assets the city owns, like land infrastructure?
City-owned properties on a map would be very helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can pull that
We
together.
have a map
And a
that, we
special
have that
color,
map.
special color,
Good
so
luck.
that we could tell.
Yeah.
the city.
Well, I mean,
It
we
should
should
be-
have,
Yeah.
if we didn't know what land that the city owned, then there'd be a big.
Yeah, we have a
bigger
map
issue.
that,
Yeah, I
have
think we
that
all, I think
mapped
most,
out.
you might have a pretty good idea of probably 90% of it, but there are some kind of bogeys out there that we've inherited over the years or they become part of they become under our ownership. We're never a part of a big, large park or a municipal structure that you might say, oh, I didn't realize the city even owned that one.
Right. And we do have a map. And then the last time I looked at it, I mean, I think one of the things that jumped out at me is just that we do own, in certain parts of town, we kind of own a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit off in that corner. And so it's a bit scattershot.
That map.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So when I've talked about, a previous meeting about capital assets, it's all the big stuff the city owns that we like are above what, $3,000, $5,000 in value, right? What our policy is.
well, technically an asset is, I think right now, anything over 1,000.
So
It's
yeah,
pretty
anything
low.
over $1,000 is like our big, like tangible stuff. And like the thing that I am big on is having a way for us to know like what assets the city has, what the value of those are, when do we know if we need to replace it or not? And like infrastructure or land assets is a big part of that. Because granted, they're not losing value, like we've owned them for however many years. It's good for us to have like on a frequent basis, just to take a look at like what all stuff do we own that we can go out and touch. And like what we're doing with those assets.
Yep.
So,
Yep. And we'll keep building that out too. That's a part of our asset management module that we're populating in the finance system too. So just to keep us moving, we'll go ahead and do the homework on the next phase of that conversation and be back in front of you in October on the next round for that. And then Ms. Holt, I believe next is source water.
this is very brief. We have been awarded a $4,564 grant for sensitive groundwater signs from the Source Water Protectionary Fund Board. And we'll be working with our partners, well, with the with the service guys to get those up. So you'll see those soon around the community in our source water protection area. So Valley, Springfield Street, those areas.
So in case you get questions, that's where those come from.
And we put some education out on the website explaining what those are about.
Yes, we can work with
It
them.
would save staff time.
Well, and now that we have a communications manager to help us out with that, I'm sure that's something that we can accomplish. So,
Put it on my list.
right.
Well, I just think anything we can inform the public about
Absolutely.
will save staff time and
And they're grant funded, so it's not like we had to pay for it, but it's working
that's
together.
important that be said.
Yeah, so it'll inform people coming in, traveling through
Right.
those areas, where to report a spill, if they see dumping, especially over that releases of water that people drink.
All right. The last item that we have identified on the budget is the one that I've been excited about here for several weeks. I'm going to go ahead and share a screen. If I can find the right one. Okay, so many of you and many of the folks in the public have heard me talk about ClearGov. And we're now at a point where I think I can start to show what exactly this means. And I do need to say some things at the top. So the first is that what I am showing tonight is not a complete budget. It is not a budget that's ready for presentation. It's not a budget where we're ready really to talk about specific line items or anything like that. It's very much in development, but it's developed enough so that I can show you what this is and what it's going to be able to do for us going forward. We'll be able to use some of it this year during this budget cycle. But it really is a tool that we are going to be able to build out over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, with the goal of eventually, I want to go win a GFOA award for budget book, because we've never done that. And this is a tool that's going to help us get there, with a roadmap to accomplish it. So to be clear, if you are seeing numbers, if you're watching this on a screen and you see numbers on screens here, those numbers are in no way final and they may not be complete. But we will continue to have budget conversations as the weeks roll on. So the first is that we have acquired, ClearGov operates like other software companies do in the financial space based on modules. We've acquired capital budgeting, personnel budgeting, operational budgeting, and a budget book module, as well as a public transparency portal. We also, and if we can get to it toward the end of this, we've participated in a beta test for Clear Plans, which is their strategic planning module. And the company's long-term goal is to fold that more deeply into the budgeting process of this side of their system. But just to kind of orient you all, the module that we've done the most work on is the personnel budget module. And what we have plugged in here so far is what we believe at present our personnel picture is going to look like going into 2024. So the neat thing about this is that it very quickly summarizes. We were doing all of this in Excel and in bits and pieces here and there before. This takes everything, all of that data, and organizes it in a way where it can be represented and summarized very quickly. So the first thing to notice is that right now, based on the assumptions that are in here, the total personnel budget is this $9.9 million figure. The only thing I can really say about that at this point is that it does not include any of the forecasted increases that are likely to come out of police and fire negotiations. It does not include any COLA increases for non-union staff. It does not include positions that may be requested during the budget process this year. So that is very much a floor number. That number will only go up. But having said that, the system's ability to summarize this is extensive and I think helpful. So these are the kinds of charts and graphs that we will be able to display in budget books and eventually online on our website going forward to help people understand how these numbers break down. So again, if we take that snapshot, that $9.9 million, about 65% of that goes to wages. The balance is in benefits. So you think pensions, healthcare, all the percent matches that we have to plug in to employ people. That really creates the bulk of where our personnel dollars go. The other thing that I really think will be very helpful for illustration purposes going forward is a lot of the budget discussions that we've had to date have been organized in terms of funds, and that's important because we do fund accounting. Fund accounting is one way of looking at our budget. It is not necessarily a way that is intuitive, I think, for people that are not familiar with government accounting. People, I think, and I'm guilty of this, you have an instinct, or some folks have an instinct to look at something like the police fund and make an assumption that, well, that's all the police department costs. And in reality, that's not true because the police department pulls money from lots of different funds. This personnel tool is able to organize all of that data in a way that we can start to show things by department. And the operating budget module, which I'm not ready to show tonight, but it basically does the same thing, where it will summarize across all funds and show the total cost that a department creates for the city, regardless of funding source. The key thing that I want to point out here is that, this, again, like I said, this number is a starting point number, but it's enough of a baseline where I think we're comfortable at this point being able to look at this data and start to show people that, when we make assumptions about keeping our staffing just the way it is going into next year, almost 40% of our personnel costs go to police and almost 40% of our personnel costs go to fire. Together, those departments are, 75% of the budget. And you can add up everybody in administration and finance and community development, and it's about a tenth, maybe a little bit more of the entire personnel budget. So I remember last year we were talking about how when we look at trying to trim the fat or trying to look at places to save on personnel costs, this is what we mean when we say there's not much there left to save. The amounts that we're talking about outside of our largest departments, which are police, fire, and service, there just aren't that many bodies. There's not that many people here. And this is a quick way of being able to summarize that and tell that story.
Is council on there? Does it partner?
Council is part of this city clerk budget. So
See that tiny
that
dot?
tiny 1.
You just remember that
2.7%.
dot.
But again, that's where
That
you
little
can
red
look
dot.
at even on the finance administration side is, still less than 7%. So that's me and everybody on that side of the office, again, we're doing quite a lot with fairly lean staffs when it comes to the city hall side. And I should add that even in police, fire, and service, even though those departments are the biggest share of our budget, they do quite a lot with the limited staffing that they have as well. So I think in cross departments, we're trying to make the best of the finances. Go ahead, sorry.
So right now we're looking strictly at the personnel costs.
Correct.
But there are associated costs with these departments in the capital budgeting. So is there an equivalent graph that shows that?
There will be.
Okay,
Not ready to show that yet.
all right.
That's probably the last module that we'll build out.
Okay.
But there is a way of developing a capital plan. And incidentally, I don't want to go too far afield, but one of the changes we're going to start to make in the budget and in showing that information through this system, and largely at the behest of the auditor, is to move, I think it's Fund 702, 703, some of our capital and debt service funds, they want us to eliminate those funds and talk about capital in terms of departments and in terms of other funds as well. So this is a tool that will let us help tell the story about when you look at, say, the public service department's budget. If you're looking at personnel, operating, and capital, it's going to look very large, but the bulk of that will be capital because roads are expensive, and it'll help us kind of get down into the weeds a little bit about where does the money really go. So it is coming.
Thank you.
I'll take that offline.
Okay.
Are you allowed to run projections in here?
That's an excellent question. Yes. And the thing that I actually don't have one plugged in here at the moment, but under this scenario tab, this is a tool that we can use. What the system does is actually, and again, this is why this is so fuzzy at the moment, is because we're in the process of negotiating our labor contracts. Once those contracts are finalized, what that lets us do is it lets us plug in if a labor group has an agreement, or excuse me, an increase that we know is coming in the out years, we can plug that into the back end of this system and it will show. That's why you kind of see a curve, a gentle curve to this graph, is because the system is able to know where employees are in the unit, what step they're at, and in where they're going to go in 25, 26, 27, and how that increases their earnings. And then in turn, how that increases benefits and other supporting costs. And so that's why it'll actually show we are building to a point where I'll be able to give you a budget and a 5-year projection that says, here's what we're going to spend next year. That budget is in balance or it isn't. And then if we fast forward 5 years, here's how our budget is in or out of whack. If, making these assumptions at the same time.
Love that.
So do I. I get really excited. Sorry. This is I'm just a complete budget nerd. But at any rate, yes. And we can create additional scenarios here as a planning tool. So, if in future years, especially, we're trying to weigh, let's cross our fingers and hope we have good revenue. If we're trying to weigh where to add staff, we will be able to build you different scenarios and show you here's how that changes based on if we go this direction versus another one. So the other thing that I really want to show, and again, I hope that this is really helpful for the public. This is the budget book module. So all of the information that we were just looking at in the personnel budget. The next step that we'll be building out over the next couple of weeks are the operating budgets. So we actually have to go through, that's going to take a little bit of legwork. But once we lock in the personnel numbers, all of those numbers automatically get imported on the operating side. And then collectively, the personnel, operating and capital numbers all automatically come into this budget book. So as before, when I'm got a giant Excel spreadsheet and I'm having to make sure my formulas aren't messed up and you're hand keying entries and everything else, this dispenses with all of that. The numbers are the numbers, they come straight out of the finance system, and it really minimizes the likelihood of human error. Won't say eliminates, but it minimizes it. And all of that information rolls up into the budget book. What I did here, just for illustration purposes, is to show, remember last year we developed that operating or popular budget, excuse me, that PDF document that kind of summarized by fund. This effectively does all of that, where on the back end, there are a list of sections, templates, if you will, that have to be built out in order to win a GFOA award. You have to report on these things and talk about these elements. We're going to start building those out. And part of what we get as a subscriber to this service is that key demographic information that you're supposed to put in, like your household incomes, population, all these other things. The service does all this for you. They have an API with the Bureau of Labor Statistics and Census where they are going through automatically and pulling in all of these charts and graphs about how many households we have, what our breakdowns are, earnings, who's kind of earning what in the community. And this automatically updates every year. So again, all that is to say a lot of the legwork that takes a lot of staff time to pull together and crunch is automated using a process like this. And once the whole budget book is built, we have the option to print it. We can print hard copies. We can convert it to a PDF. And there's a way to embed this budget book on the website so that people can access it whenever they want and kind of flip through a lot of these statistics and everything else as well. So again, the idea is, and of course there are capital and debt service modules as well. And again, I want to be very clear about setting expectations. Like we are going to be at a place where I think, depending on how the next couple of weeks go, as we're building this out, I'm pretty comfortable that we're going to have personnel and operating in a really good place. I'm hopeful that we'll also be able to have capital in a good place to have budget conversations in October, November. And then a lot of these other sections and a lot of the other detail, that's the work that we pivot to next year and the year after. And we just start building the templates out and plugging away. And then before you know it, a couple of years from now, we've got a full-fledged budget book and we can start going to GFOA and saying, hey, I need a certificate. So anyway, the last element that I'll show here tonight is the strategic planning module. So this is a module they call Clear Plans. And the company's long-term roadmap is to create more linkages between this kind of a product and the budget itself, to where eventually a couple of years down the road, we'll be able to say, all right, I have a budget line item that I know supports a particular strategic initiative that the city of Riverside is working on, and all of that data will be linked. So if we update something in the strategic plan, it'll be reflected in the budget, vice versa. But what I really wanted to show this evening is just that when we finished our strategic planning document last year, that was a PDF. I've started to populate that for the sake of example into this tool. And I've actually talked to the company. I think the real strength of this module is that, yeah, it is a strategic planning tool in the sense that this lets us go through, we had key focus and priority areas, and we had identified some projects like how do we bring in more grant money? How do we reduce our debt? Or even in the economic development side, which I'm going to get a little bit lost here. Bear with me. If we go back to some of these. Oh, I hadn't plugged them in yet, but either way, we have specific projects that we've identified in each one of these focus areas. The real strength of this is that under each of the focus areas, we can identify specific tasks that have to be done and then indicate whether or not those tasks are on track. And actually what I'm looking for here is the stormwater. Let me find that real fast. Here we go. Here's a good example. So one of our key initiatives under financial sustainability was to implement the stormwater utility fee. What the tool lets you do is actually assign tasks. So a first step to passing a stormwater utility fee is to pass an ordinance. And then we have to develop a policy manual. Well, that's in progress now. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. We got to build an educational campaign. We got to build out our module. We have to do all these other things. The tool is much more than just kind of checking the boxes and saying, oh yeah, it's about halfway done. What we're able to do on the back end of this is actually to assign those tasks to staff, to people that are responsible for logging in and updating the tool. So what I was trying to explain earlier is that I actually had a conversation with the company and I said, I think what you've actually built is a work planning tool, because I can take this and say, all right, Ms. Holt, you're responsible for this part of the economic development strategy in our strategic plan. Every quarter, I need you to log in here and give us an update. Is it done? Is it not done? Is it, et cetera? And then as these tasks change or as circumstances warrant, provide those updates in the tool. And this is also something that we can build a mirror to on the website so that anytime people can come out and see, all right, well, this is where the status of the strategic plan is, and go from there as well. So again, there's a lot of meat here for us to chew through and get our arms around and deploy. We're pretty far along, particularly on the budgeting side of things. But I did want to just show you this evening and kind of show the public too, that we haven't just been paying lip service to the idea that we're trying to really get our arms around a budget and get ourselves to a place where we can tell a coherent story, to tell the facts on the ground reality about where the money's coming from and where it's going and why. This is what we're going to use to do that. And I think it's a very powerful tool that will persist, that we can put up on the website, and that is dynamic and will adapt to circumstances as they evolve for us too. So again, kind of a high level, just a quick demo there, but we will probably spend most of our time in budget conversations in this budget book module, because what it lets us do is really dive into, again, like what each department means for the city. These numbers are not, these numbers are extra fuzzy, just put it that way, because not everything is in on the operating side yet. But the main idea here again is that it will show there's an opportunity for us to talk about what each department does, put an org chart in. It shows all the numbers. It'll show it by fund, give you the histories, break it all out by function, and by type. So this is, remember when I said earlier that once we get everything into the service department, it'll look like a big number, but most of it's going to end up being capital. And this is another way of kind of slicing that out to illustrate some of that stuff. So again, very powerful. Really looking forward to building this out, and then we'll have our budget workshops and probably lean on this quite a bit and walk through each department one at a time. Happy to take any questions that you have.
I like it.
Cool.
That's really cool. I like how you said that it has a window that we can embed it to the website.
Mhm.
I guess that's a future down the road. So I know the website getting rebuilt is a whole project in and of itself. The other piece, like outside of like what we're planning on doing, is like a budget. If you're not ready to show it yet, you're not ready to show it yet, I get it. But the transparency piece. I don't know if you want to.
I don't know that I have anything really to show. Basically what it, and again, what we're looking at here is the back end, but what it effectively lets us do is look at any number of these indicators, or we can create dashboards or custom graphics. And then it basically creates a widget that you can embed on the website. So if we're trying to really monitor, some indicator, some budget trend, we can pull together a chart or a graph that'll do that and then put it out there. It's basically a way of condensing the budget information in a way that's easier to digest.
So this is like, for me, if you look at some municipalities, they have like an open checkbook.
Yep.
Right. So this would be our open checkbook. So what I would like, everybody else in council agrees, is like, for what we can be transparent about with our everyday financial transactions, that's something I know that I want to come to a resident and say, like, here's our budget, here's what we're working on for like strategic planning. But if you have a question about where our money is going, like, go look for yourself. Right. And as a resident, you should have that ability. I mean, they could put in a Freedom of Information Act request, but just having that ability to be transparent. We're not hiding anything. Here's our money. Here's where we have to spend it. Here's our obligations. You have the ability to look at that.
Mhm.
So not just as a nerd with governmental accounting, but also just out of the fiduciary responsibilities that we have to our residents. I think I would love to see that put into the website, some type of open checkbook thing. And I'm happy because it looks like this thing can easily accomplish that.
The things that we're planning to put on the outward facing website, would there be the ability to drill down into any of the graphs? Or are they pretty static?
That I'm not sure of. I'll have to get back with you on that. I think that I believe because that's because I haven't built these out yet.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think what they will do though, if they're anything like the way that these graphs are set up, or even in the budget book is probably the better place to point this to. I think they're interactive in the sense that like when you hover over them,
Mhm.
it'll give you some additional information. I don't know that it'll let you like
Drill
drill
down.
down in though.
Okay.
But that is an opportunity, I think, where if we start to get people that say, well, what really does this bar mean? My understanding is we can use that transparency portal then to develop a widget or graph or something that answers that question
Right.
and then use that to help.
I would hope that if I'm just a very interested citizen and I hover over one of these and I might know that this is a capital improvement budget line, I might at least have a coinciding fund number that if I'm looking at the reports that finance gives city council, which is in the agenda packet and is public record on a monthly basis, I would at least be able to say 506 and then correspond with 506. I think some of the maybe criticisms in the past that people might have pushed back on me as an elected official, or maybe others up here, is that the finance report that we get in our council packet isn't as digestible to somebody who doesn't live in that world. But I think this is the infograph that allows you to begin that understanding that anybody can start with this. And that, to me, that's what's really, really encouraging.
Right. It really is the start of a conversation. And I think moving forward, as we continue to build these out, I think our intention would be to start to build the graphs and charts that are most helpful for council and the public, and to use those in the monthly report or in the packets, when we're doing monthlies. And at the same time, I think it's also important to acknowledge that I believe while this is a very helpful tool, and I think will answer a lot of questions or help facilitate people getting to those answers, it's also not the only tool. So, our VIP finance system, I think in some respects does a better job of doing summaries by fund, for example, than maybe how some of this is set up. But then again, that's also an area that we'll continue to keep working. We're going to use every tool at our disposal to try to help answer these questions as best we can,
So something I get into like consistently is that all the financial data in the world is great. It's for us 7 to be able to look at it, and we need something to be able to have a good understanding of our financial position, because at the end of the day, what we're responsible for is making decisions based on that data. Like, does it make sense for us to put money into capital assets? Does it make sense to approve this budget amendment? So like what this is, without having to have a high level understanding of governmental accounting, is you can look in here, and I like how Josh pointed out by department, you're able to see what a department costs, right? Because you have capital expenses. So if I'm buying a new truck, I'm buying a piece of land, I'm buying something that's super expensive and it's in a different fund, but it's a high cost item, it's that department that's paying for it. So while it's not directly allocated to the fund, like you mentioned, we're able to see how much the public works, fire, police, administration is spending for capital expenses, for residual expenses, and so on. So I think this, along with the kind of combining the two reports together, or two systems together, I mean, for me, this gives me a really good understanding on when we're having those high level discussions on the budget of where our financial position is as a city.
Now, does this do the same thing with income coming in? It's separated so that we can tell that, because I know there's specific money for the gas taxes and stuff like that can only be spent for, so is it gonna be able to kind of, when we look at the services department, we'll be able to say that, this piece, whatever this piece is paid for by, blue money, which is gas tax or whatever. I mean, it'll be able to give us a picture of that, income as well as expenditures. And I think that's going to be, that for me is important. And I think people need to know that, they think, yes, okay, so we have a budget and this is where we're spending it, but where does that money come from that we're spending? And, we can, income tax, most of our income tax goes to fire and police. So, but we still pull some out of our regular income tax to help fund fire and police on top of that.
Right.
So people need to understand that so that when we get ready to go out and say, look, there's no money for roads, there's no black money here for blacktop, so this is what we're asking for. And I think that's going to be important to be able to show that picture. Income versus what we're spending, and that if you want us to do more, we need more coming in. And I think that's going to be important to everybody.
The
Right.
big thing to with that, with what you're saying, Mike, is that in an ideal world, every department would be self-funded, right? Because you have its dedicated income source. So the police fund receives revenue in from the income tax. Fire department receives the bulk of their revenue in from their income tax. Public Works Department with the stormwater utility will be receiving money on a revenue line item from the stormwater.
Yeah.
utility.
And I
then
think,
the
but I think it's
difference
important.
is,
And then with the projections, we'll be able to, when Josh says, okay, we need to charge X number of dollars for stormwater utility, and that's what it's going to do for us, and this is what it's going to do for us in the budget, I think that's going to be important to us.
Right.
To make that, just help make that decision. But I think it's also going to be helpful to be able to tell that story.
Yeah, explain why the decision ended where it, or.
Well, yeah, why
resulted
we're
where it
making
did.
that decision and what direction it's going, because, and then you've got the whole trickle down, because we're able to do that. Okay. Because we're able to fund part of the services department with the stormwater utility. Now we have a little bit more to be able to do something, an extra road with, or whatever the answer is.
Right.
the big,
So I think this is going to give us a good tool to be able to tell the story that we need to tell, so that we can do what we need to do.
Well, and what I can kind of leave it here, I think, which is that after we get the operating side plugged in, and that will get our data at a place where I can start to build out a budget book for 24 and start to show those revenue and expense pie charts and everything else. And to me, that's kind of the value of the budget work session. Whereas instead of last year, I kind of took everybody sort of fund by fund. We can do that again. We'll also be able to go kind of department by department and almost sort of preview what the budget book is going to look like. And then as those questions come up, because the ideally we'll be at a situation where, I don't know if you remember what it looked like, but it basically, it will give you total revenues coming in, total expenditures going out. Here's your delta above or below, especially compared to next year. And that becomes a hook to have good conversations.
That's your-
So,
Because the
Right.
thing that always drove me crazy was we have income coming in and then we have going out, but then, and it looked like we were double spending money, and I just gave up.
we would work for, in an ideal world, is that there's no money from the general fund.
Yeah, but we
being
don't have an
used,
ideal world. We're talking
Right.
about what we have right now.
But it's showing.
And I understand what you're saying, but it drove me nuts to see, if I added up all of what we were spending or what was coming in, it wasn't what was really coming in. It almost looked like twice as much. It drove me crazy, but I'm not a bookkeeper, so.
the transfer.
Yeah, it was the transfers that drove me nuts.
well, and honestly, that's one of the
It was
things
hard
that,
to understand.
yeah, that's one of the things that we are working out on the back end with ClearGov, because I want to be sure that when we put transfers in, that the system is showing those as revenue in another department. You
Right.
know what I mean? And so that is one of the implementation pieces that we're working through now.
So like, that's what I would want to see is like how much, like if the fund is getting money from the general fund, that means it's not solvent. So it can't fund itself. So just like how much of the dedicated revenue source then it has, and then how much the general fund is funding that department or that fund. So we know like what the deficit is there, because that would be
Right.
like, okay, it's not making enough for itself.
Right.
And the general funds happen to give it money. That's your big red line item, like, hey, there's something wrong here.
Well, or there's a level of subsidy that
Right,
that is needed. So
right.
that's all I had though on ClearGov. So we will save the rest of that for October and November when we get deeper into the budget process. I had just 3 brief manager updates. The first involves Valley Crest. So as many of you know, the city of Dayton is working on a project up north near Valley Crest. That's the wrong map. And let me share. The right one. Okay. So the city of Dayton is working on remediation efforts up near Valley Crest
With the EPA.
with the EPA. It's a very long and complex process. One of the things that the city actually came to Miss Bartlett and I last year and suggested that one of the things they are trying to do, this is kind of that area of Valley Crest that they are working in. Our city boundary is north of this dashed line up here in this pocket. One of the things the city of Dayton wants to do is take this right of way, some of which is pretty worn down and almost kind of like a path, but actually extend it out to make more of an official road that connects up to Brant Pike. The challenge is, of course, that there's this little section of that right of way that's technically in Riverside. So Dayton has very politely asked if we could change the boundaries of the city to effectively carve out that little slice of right of way to let them connect up the road. In other words, I didn't think it made much sense for us to insist to keep the boundary hole and then take care of this little tiny section of road. If they want to take care of it, we could accomplish that through a boundary change. What they have provided to the Dayton City Commission is this document. I should share that here too, which is just the actual drawing that shows this little hashed section overlays that road that we were just looking at. So Ms. Grangine is working on the ordinance for this. I'm happy to bring it up at another work session if you'd like to talk about it. It did seem fairly straightforward to me in terms of we're not giving up any income tax. We're not giving up any residents. We're not giving up any businesses. We're giving up a liability in the sense that if they want a road, we could probably just let them have it. But again, open into comments.
Have it.
Right, exactly. And in that sense, maybe a boundary adjustment makes some sense.
So that
So
trucking terminal doesn't have any employees.
you're talking about just to the south there? That would still remain in our limits. That's that little slice. Well, let me not speak out of turn. This building would still be in the city's limits, our city limits. The idea is basically to push. And I'll verify that I'm understanding this correctly, but that crosshatch section that you saw on the PDF map is really the only part that we would be giving up in terms of boundaries. We're basically we're bringing the pink line over and up and around so that Dayton will control the entirety of that roadway that connects up to Brant Pike. So we're only carving off that road.
Be attached. It won't be, Jurgens will not be detached because
Correct.
our border still goes on the.
Yep, it'll still
also-
come down and across. So they'll stay within our limits.
Right.
So that's an update there. Once Ms. Grangine has kind of wrapped up the ordinance, then that'll come before you.
I think our grandchildren and our great grandchildren will be dealing with Valley Crest.
Well, they may. It is
It is
a lift for sure.
Oh.
The next thing that I had update wise is just that staff have been working very diligently on the third quarter supplemental, which will come to you for a first reading next week. There will be more information in the packet. The total supplemental dollar amount is right around $350,000 for a third quarter. I think it's important to emphasize that right around half of that, if not a little more, is because we have been awarded grants that are reimbursable. So we have to front the money before we can get money back. So about 160, 180,000 of the supplemental is to facilitate those grants.